And in as much as someone will say that they're bisexual, they have a much bigger leaning to one sex versus the other. So, for example, you hear guys that will say that they're bisexual, but for the most part, if you look at their past sexual experiences that they tell you, it's mostly been with guys. Or you listen to a woman who says that she's a bisexual woman, and most of her interactions, most of her sexual experiences have been with women. And you're like, but doesn't that make you lesbian? They're like,
the royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who believes that astrology should have been the study of ass. He is also a man who believes that jumping to conclusions should be a form of cardio. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has come through with a lot less deep than the past two have had because, my word, I feel like I've been discussing deep topics for a while. So I figured instead of having to talk about the certain dynamics in relationships, money, sex, and so on, I figured I'd talk about something that is a little bit broader and something that affects an entire generation of people, more so Gen Zs, and possibly Gen Alpha as well. But before I can get into any of that, first of all, thank you so much for listening. I hope you listen all the way till the end. And if you do want to show your love, your hate, or just want to give some feedback, or you want to suggest a topic that I should talk about, then the place to do it is at the Breakdown_podcast on IG, at the Breakdown Podcast on Facebook, and at Bagaka the D on X. The DMs are always open, and I would be more than happy to see what it is that you guys get to say about me. And if you don't feel like using social media, or if you're allergic to social media, there is usually a link at the top of the description which usually says give feedback here, where you can give your feedback directly to me and I will receive it without using social media, and I can address whatever it is that you want me to talk about. Now, like I said initially, I do have some generational shit that I need to talk about, but before I can get to that, I first want to talk about something very interesting that I found out when I was busy checking out Chris Williamson's IG page. Now, for those of y'all that don't know who Chris Williamson is the host of the Modern Wisdom podcast. He has a bunch of people there, one of the few people I look up to. Over 700 episodes, and the guy has, I think, 2-point-something million subs on YouTube. So as far as looking up to people in the same profession or in the same field that I'm at, he's definitely one of the few guys that I actually do look up to. Now, there was one of the posts that he had where he was talking about 3 things that he learned, and the most interesting part that I saw here was the first one where he said, gay men see bisexual men as quote-unquote secretly gay, lesbians see bisexual women as quote-unquote secretly straight. Now, that was the title of the first thing that he learned, and my interest was so piqued that I just couldn't let it go. Now, the guy says, and I quote, across 2 studies involving a total of 288 gay and lesbian participants, researchers examined attitudes towards and stereotypes of bisexuals. Here's a brief review of their major findings. Both gay men and lesbians held more negative views of bisexual persons of the same sex than they did of the other sex. Compared to lesbians, gay men were more likely to see bisexual men as having an unstable sexual orientation. Likewise, compared to gay men, lesbians were more likely to see bisexual women as having an unstable sexual orientation. Gay men tended to see bisexual men as being secretly gay, whereas lesbians tended to see bisexual women as secretly straight. In other words, both groups perceived bisexuals, regardless of their sex, as being more attracted to men than to women. Lesbians' greater negativity towards bisexual women, relative to gay men, was statistically explained by lesbians' greater tendency to view bisexual women as being primarily attracted to men. By contrast, gay men's perception of bisexual men as secretly gay did not account for why they held more negative attitudes towards bi men than did lesbians. These results indicate that not only does bisexual prejudice exist in the gay community, but that there are some interesting gender dynamics at play here. Therefore, if we want to understand the nature of this bias, we can't collapse across gay men and lesbians in research. We need to look at their attitudes separately, which was quoted from Dr. Justin Lemilla and end quote. Okay, so this is actually pretty interesting. Now, the whole idea of bisexual people, bisexual men, bisexual women being viewed pretty differently isn't something that I find to be particularly surprising because I have very, very similar views to what's being said here, which is pretty interesting because I'm neither gay nor lesbian. Okay, you could call me lesbian, but I don't have a vagina, so I'm not a woman. But when I kind of think about bisexual men, a lot of times I do tend to think that bisexual men, or at least most bisexual men, are secretly gay. They would much rather say that they're bisexual so that they seem to blend in with a lot of the straight guys. At least that's how I look at it sometimes. Now, with bisexual women, I feel like it's more or less the same thing. They're probably straight women, but they just have the added option, or at least they have the added unlocked option of receiving pleasure and finding interest in other women. So it's like, yeah, they can be straight and they can live a pretty straight life, but on the low, they can go and get some pussy and no one's going to bat an eyelash. But then again, I feel like that's kind of the thing with a lot of guys, and I think that's kind of how a lot of us guys look at it. Granted, this isn't something that I've gone to like do a poll or anything. This is probably just me just talking out of my feelings. And much as this study does actually show, how gay men look at bisexual men and how lesbians look at bisexual women, it also underlines that there's a certain prejudice against bisexuals. And oddly enough, this shit actually reminds me of something that Dave Chappelle was busy talking about in one of his specials when he was busy talking about the LGBT in one bus, and how the L's and the G's don't like the B's very much because they look at them as like whores. And I wouldn't be surprised if people from the L's and the G's did look at the B's in that particular way. Now, I also do think that gay men probably don't like bisexual men very much, or don't like men who say that they're bisexual very much, because it's like, you're probably gay and you should probably admit that you like men, so that, the more of us that are there, the less marginalized we can feel. And for the most part, all you're doing is just keeping up an act by trying to get some pussy, and which like we already know. Just become all gay, Stop acting like you like pussy. You know very well you don't. You're just in it so that, you can sort of make it seem as though you're a bit straight. And we can totally understand the appeal for it. Now, with the lesbian women, I really can't think that far into why lesbian women would probably think that bisexual women are secretly straight. But considering that for a while, or at least I wouldn't even say a while, considering that in some circles and along a lot of liberal lines, a chick being able to go and make out and do a bunch of intimate stuff with another chick is considered sexy or hot or wild, it is pretty understandable that lesbians would look at bisexual women as like, you're just doing this shit for fun and you're not serious about it. If you were serious, you'd probably renounce the dick. But granted, all of this I'm just saying like entirely out of my ass. And to continue things that I'm saying entirely out of my ass here, well, personally speaking, I feel like there's no person who's a full 50-50 bisexual. Like, there's a much bigger leaning on one side versus the other. And in as much as someone will say that they're bisexual, they have a much bigger leaning to one sex versus the other. So, for example, you hear guys that will say that they're bisexual, but for the most part, if you look at their past sexual experiences that they tell you, it's mostly been with guys. Or you listen to a woman who says that she's a bisexual woman, and most of her interactions, most of her sexual experiences have been with women. And you're like, but doesn't that make you lesbian? They're like, no, I'm also interested in dick. Just the same way you'll hear guys saying, no, I'm also interested in women. Or you find that it's a guy who says that they're bisexual, but for the most part, like, they've mostly been banging babes. They rarely ever bang guys, but they say that they're open to banging guys as well. So you're like, are you really bisexual though? And when you're listening to a guy busy telling you how bisexual they are, but over the past 5 years they've only banged dudes, at some point you're like, but doesn't that just make you gay for the most part? Yes, you may have banged a chick like probably 7, 8, 10 years ago, but doesn't that heavily underscore the fact that you are gay, but you've just had a couple of experiences with women that were pretty good? But then again, considering that I don't fully understand sexuality or the LGBT, I could be wrong, and it's not like I know this for certain, so I'd always love your feedback on it. But all in all, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, like I said earlier on, I wasn't going to be talking about relationship dynamics in this particular case. Not hitting on a babe, not talking about finances in a relationship. Nah, I'm not going to talk about that on this one. This time, I feel like it's a much broader topic that needs to be talked about, and it's an entire generational problem. And that problem is the social awkwardness that is making Gen Z lonely as hell. and it might even be affecting Gen Alpha way more than we think, to a degree that we haven't even seen yet. Now, all of this started off because I saw a post probably about 2 weeks ago on Reddit on social awkwardness, and I'm going to read it in a little bit, but I didn't think too much about it when I was reading the post back then. But about a day before I recorded this episode, I stumbled onto another post on Reddit where a guy was busy talking about how his birthday was, I think, a couple of days ahead, and he didn't have anyone that he was going to be celebrating with, so he'd just be chilling at home. And it actually kind of hit me that this is a much bigger problem than I might have thought, than a lot of us might have thought. Now, let me just read the post on social awkwardness, which says, and I quote, "I saw a post somewhere saying that people nowadays, especially the Gen Z, have a fear trait. People are becoming less social that it's difficult to talk to a cashier or even make a call. I personally find it hard to call people unless it's necessary." Another person ended up going past their stage because they were too afraid to tell the conductor that they need to stop and get out. You guys should think higher about yourselves. What could be the cause of this social anxiety? Is it the food or the social media that is contributing to this? Because I feel so entitled, especially if I have a right to have that particular thing or service. End quote. Okay, now this is a particularly general topic to talk about. Doesn't sound like it's in my wheelhouse, but in as much as it might seem like that's really the case, I am interested in it because Gen Z are the same people that are trying to get into relationships now. Gen Zs are starting to get married right now. Like, I know someone who is a Gen Z who got married about a year ago. So, like, this is something that's gonna affect a shit ton of relationships as well. So, in some indirect way, it does sort of affect what it is that I talk about. And so it is something that I do genuinely need to look into, because it's not like it's that small of an issue. It's actually much, much bigger than we might think. And the worst part about it is, like, you'd think that it's probably better in a lot of other places, but in the West, it's even worse than that. Like, in the States, if you're someone that's listening to me and you're in the States or in Europe or some part of the Western Hemisphere, like, you can tell me how much worse it gets, because I've spoken to family that live there, and you realize how little people actually talk to each other, like have an actual conversation with their mouths, and it's so minimal. People do not go to the bank to go and like get services from the bank. They do it from their phone. And if the worst comes to it, they'll probably call. And that's really if the worst comes to it. If they're talking, most times they will prefer to do text instead of call. And then that's when they'll meet up. Like, you realize people actually interact and talk a lot less nowadays, and it actually affects people. But I never really thought that it would affect actual friendships up until I read this post where some guy said, and I quote, "I'll be turning a year older pretty soon. I'm male for context. Since I know I'ma wake up to 0 happy birthday wishes, I thought I'd just leave this here. 0 friends who we hang out with, no social life, so it'll just be me with my blunts. To every Virgo alone out there, viva comrade. It's weird I was born on a fucking Sunday on the last day of the month and I have this kind of shitty life. And then in terms of my social life, I'm not complaining. My own company is enough, thank you very much." End quote. Now, normally, of course, it's not like it would be that big of an issue for guys to talk about, "Oh, you know, it's my birthday, let me do this and that." I've had birthdays where I've done nothing and just chilled home. I've had birthdays where I've gone to the office and just worked. Like, it's not like a guy celebrating his birthday is that big of a thing. But the way dude is describing it, it sounds like it probably should have been more, but he doesn't have the people to chill and enjoy it with. And I'm not saying that the both are directly related and like this guy doesn't have friends because he's socially awkward. No, the reason I'm bringing this is there's a lot of young guys that can make friends very easily. There's a lot of people that can make friends very easily if they just started talking to people a little bit more. And for the most part, people don't realize how bad this is for Gen Z. And I'm saying this as someone that is right smack dab at the boundary of millennial and Gen Z. So I can say for a fact that I know how bad social awkwardness is. You know, I do have my own times when I have issues and I am actually trying to talk to people that I haven't met before, that I'm trying to get a service from, who I will be trying to talk to, and I just can't express myself as much or as well as I'd want to. And it's an issue that I am trying to combat every so often. It's an issue that I am consciously trying to combat. And I've been trying to think about why exactly this is an issue. And, knowing that this is something that affects Gen Z on a much grander level, it is something that I did sort of try and ask myself what the issue is. I sort of tried to look into it quite a bit, and I came down with probably about 3 different reasons why this is the case. Now, the first one is the parents, the second one is social media, and the third one is the systems that we have. So the reason why I think the parents are, can I say to blame, or a big contributing factor to this is, for a lot of Gen Z parents, you find that they are either late stage Gen X or early stage millennials. So you think about the kind of information that they had when they were trying to have kids and when they had kids. You think about the kind of things that they got to know when they had kids, and the kind of living conditions and environments. And you do start to pick up on the fact that a lot of these parents did hold their kids back from the whole, just go out and play with your friends, because a lot of people were moving into apartments. So it's not like they were, in a certain estate somewhere filled with a bunch of kids where everyone can just go and sit and play and, there's a couple of adults around and it's gonna be good. There's a lot of kids that grew up and they spend most of their time at home, seated, chilling, quiet, or playing PlayStation. And a lot of the times whenever they'd go to friend groups and friend meetups, it was controlled, and the parents were the ones that held a lot of those controls. Then when you think about also the whole bit of speaking up, whenever Gen Zs have issues at school or had issues at school, you'd find that the parents were called, or the parents would come and speak up for them. No, you can't do this to my kid. Oh, no, you can't do blah, blah, blah for my kid. When us guys were growing up, if us guys get whooped and we go and we tell our parents, we're gonna go back and then we're gonna get whooped some more. We wouldn't talk about that shit. For the most part, we weren't talking about shit like that. But a lot of Gen Z's parents were like, no, you can't whoop my kid like that. So, I can remember during my time, that was when I started noticing that teachers were whooping the younger kids a lot less. And even when you move it on towards post-high school level, when you're in uni and when you're a civilian, you listen to a lot of Gen Z's busy talking about, oh, I was having such and such an issue with so and so, and then my parents decided to get involved, or I involved my parents in this. And you're like, why are your parents being involved in this shit and you're a fully grown adult? I thought this is some shit that you're supposed to sort of handle yourself. Now, granted, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but you realize that a lot of people were sort of carried by their parents, and their parents sort of gave them this cushion and this protective cover that now when they are fully grown adults and they have to sort of, navigate the world on their own, it becomes a lot harder because they haven't learned how to speak up for themselves. They haven't learned how to say what it is that they feel or what it is that they want to people, more so strangers or people that may be in authority to them. So that could be a problem. Then secondly, social media. Now, you think about it, a lot of interactions nowadays, actually a good chunk of your interactions nowadays are being done through social media. I meet way less people, I talk to way less people on the phone, but I'm constantly chatting with people on social media, be it WhatsApp, be it sending funny reels on DMs, on IG, whether it's busy chatting a bunch of BS on Twitter. People are mostly interacting on social media now than they have ever done before. Now, for a lot of us millennials, we grew with social media. So for a lot of us, you find that social media is an extension of our external social lives. So you find that I have friends here and we're going to talk and we're going to have fun, but when we hop on social media, now that's an extension of it. So maybe there's a couple of other friends. But with Gen Z, I feel like they got flipped around, where it's most of the interactions and most of their friends are on social media. So it's social media is where their social life is, and then out here is an extension of that social media. So they might meet a couple of the friends there. And I've read stories and seen instances of people who will talk so well on social media, they'll be chatting a lot of shit, they'll be talking like they're the shit when they're on DMs. Then when the two people meet in person, all of a sudden they're saying that they had nothing to talk about, they were unable to converse with each other. And it's actually a real problem. People are chatting on social media and they feel like they have that much freedom. Then when they go to do it in real life, you suddenly realize that a lot of these people are just very shy, very socially awkward, and the sort of, can I call it a wall, or this gate that social media has kind of protects them so that they can bring out the best of themselves, which is particularly interesting. Then last but not least, we have the problem that is systems, or at least the systems that we have now. Now, it's not that the systems are a problem, but it's what the systems have done over a long time. People have gotten to a point where you do not need to interact with someone to get a bunch of shit done during the day. Like, you do not need to physically meet someone. Like, you think about it, if you have an online job and you're working from the house, you can literally do all of your communication through email and through chatting online using whatever platforms are there for the office. Then when it's lunchtime, you will have your food delivered via Glovo or Uber Eats or whatever other service is there. If you need something and you've decided to buy it, you can have it sent over via delivery, and you barely have to talk to someone. You barely have to make an actual conversation with someone besides when you get out and you go and you make your payment, or you just get out and receive the package, or you're giving feedback on something. So you realize that people don't need to talk as much anymore, and they don't need to interact physically as much anymore, and it's as a result of the systems that are there. Now, don't get me wrong, they're all there to make life easier. They're there because they make life easier for us. Otherwise, they wouldn't really exist. But at the same time, in as much as it's made life easier for us, it's also put a lot of people in this comfort zone where having actual interactions with other people, especially people that they've never met or just random people, becomes so hard because they have the systems that are there, because they have a phone that they don't need to talk to the person next to them. They can just start chatting with people online. So it just becomes very, very odd and very, very interesting that we are the most connected we've ever been, but at the same time, we are the least capable of having face-to-face interactions. Like, you think about it, people that have been around for like the past 40, 50 plus years find it so easy to just talk to a random individual. But you look at someone who's in their 20s, so full of life, they're probably even attractive and people want them. Like, them walking up to someone and just talking to them out of the blues is so hard that you actually wonder what it is that's holding them back. And the question that I do ask myself from time to time is, how can we actually change this? Can we actually make this something that can be solvable? And when I think about it, and I look at how we've dealt with a lot of similar issues in the past, the only way that I can see a way through all of this is through being intentional about it. Like, oddly enough, when I think about a similar scenario to this, the first thing that pops up is just a lot of people in being fit. Now, back in the day, you didn't have as many people that had issues of obesity and lifestyle problems that are related to that, just mainly because a lot of people were actually a lot smaller. Now, you could say that it was because of the beauty standards, but at the same time, you think about it, a lot of people were walking everywhere. A lot of people would, move around from point A to B via walking. If you were moving along a distance, you'd have to go and use public transportation because not that many people had cars. So you'd have to walk to the stage, which could sometimes be kilometers away. And, people were also doing manual labor. People were tilling a farm. People were doing a lot of their washing, a lot of their cleaning in the house, which is all physical activity in some way, shape, or form. But now we have combined harvesters and harvesting machines, so you don't have to go and till the land. You can take a boda to the stage, then take a mat, or you can just take a car or take an Uber because it's convenient. You don't have to leave your house to go to the shop and buy food when you can order through a delivery app. And you think about it, how people have gotten themselves back to being active is through being intentional about it and going to the gym, choosing to, just take walks on their own. So it has to be an intentional decision that is not a part of your typical daily needs, because you can get all of those needs met without having to do that task. So you have to be intentional about it. And I think about talking, and I think about the social interactions people can have. And to conclude all of this, I think more young people need to start having random conversations with random strangers a little bit more. I know it seems like a hard thing to do, and I know it sounds super far-fetched, but you think about it, when guys are busy talking to other guys or trying to teach other guys how to hit on women, we start by telling people to just start having random conversations with people so that you can ease yourself into the idea of trying to have a random conversation with someone, or having a conversation with someone you've never met that you don't know, so that you can get a certain goal out of them, or so that you can achieve a certain goal with that interaction. So I would say, I think more Gen Zs and I think more people need to start having open, random conversations with people just so that they can keep up their social skills. Otherwise, we're going to have more people that are going to interact with random individuals on the internet and they're going to think that they have a connection and that person is great. Then they're going to meet them in person and realize that they do not even know how to talk to each other. Or maybe I'm being a little bit too existential about this entire thing, but all in all, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, it is at the Breakdown_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breakdown Podcast. And on X, it is at BagakaZD. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.